Imagine a lonely road in Ohio where a kind-hearted mechanic stops to fix a stranger's broken truck, only to find out she's hiding a secret bigger than the fortune she left behind. What starts as a simple act of kindness spirals into a journey of trust, love, and a garage that becomes more than just a place to fix things. Want to know how far a good deed can take you? Stick around. This story's just getting started. And hey, if you're enjoying these tales of heart and hope, consider hitting that subscribe button. It's a little way to join the ride and catch every twist we've got coming your way. Now let's roll into poor mechanic fixes a stranded woman's car, not knowing she's a secret billionaire, testing his heart. The sun dipped low over the Ohio horizon, painting the sky in streaks of burnt orange and soft lavender. Hank Wheeler pedaled his old Schwinn bicycle down County Road 12, the familiar hum of crickets filling the evening air. At 52, he wasn't a man who rushed. Life had taught him to savor the slow moments, the ones that didn't demand anything but a steady heartbeat and a clear head. His flannel shirt fluttered slightly in the breeze, the faint scent of motor oil clinging to it like a second skin. The day had been long at the garage, 2 oil changes, a stubborn carburetor, and a kid's bike that needed a new chain, but it was the kind of tired that felt honest, earned. He was halfway home, maybe a mile from the turnoff to his little house with the sagging porch, when he saw it. A beat-up Ford pickup, its hood propped open like a wounded bird, parked crookedly on the gravel shoulder. A woman stood beside it, arms crossed, staring at the engine as if willpower alone might coax it back to life. She was striking in a way that didn't shout, tall with blonde hair tucked under a simple scarf, her khaki coat catching the last rays of daylight. She didn't look like she belonged on this stretch of nowhere. But then again, Hank had learned long ago that people didn't always fit where you found them. He slowed his bike, the tires crunching against the gravel as he came to a stop. "Engine trouble?" he called out, his voice carrying that low, gravelly warmth that years of small-town living had honed. The woman turned, her brown eyes meeting his with a flicker of surprise, then relief. "Yeah," she said, her tone clipped, but not unfriendly. "It just died. No warning, no nothing." Hank propped his bike against a mile marker and ambled over, wiping his hands on his jeans out of habit. "Mind if I take a look? I've got a knack for these things." She stepped aside with a nod, watching as he leaned under the hood. The engine was a mess of dust and neglect. Radiator hose cracked, battery terminals corroded, but nothing he couldn't handle. He pulled a small toolbox from the worn canvas bag slung over his bike, the kind of kit he'd carried since he was a kid, tinkering with his dad's old Chevy. "Looks like you've been pushing this old gal too hard," he said, glancing up with a half smile. "She's mad at you now." The woman, Sophia, though he didn't know it yet, let out a soft laugh, the sound unexpected and bright against the quiet road. "Guess I'm not much of a sweet talker when it comes to trucks." Hank chuckled, already loosening the hose clamp with a screwdriver. "Well, lucky for you I am. Give me 10 minutes and she'll be purring again." He worked with the ease of a man who'd spent decades coaxing life back into machines, his hands steady despite the calluses and faint scars crisscrossing his knuckles. As he tightened a bolt, he tossed out a story to fill the silence. Something about the time he'd bet his buddy Joe a 6-pack of Budweiser that he could fix a tractor in under an hour. "Won by 3 minutes, he said, grinning. "Joe still owes me that beer." Sophia smiled, leaning against the truck's fender. There was something about this guy, his easy humor, the way he didn't seem to mind the dirt smudging his shirt, that felt like a warm blanket on a chilly night. She hadn't expected that. Not here, not now. "You're good at this," she said, her voice softer. "Fixing things, I mean." Hank shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Just what I do. Been at it since I was a kid. Name's Hank, by the way." "Sophia," she replied, hesitating just a beat too long before adding, "Thanks for stopping." Most people wouldn't. "Most people don't know what they're missing," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He stepped back, brushing his hands together. "There you go. Good as new or close enough. Try starting her up." Sophia slid into the driver's seat, and the engine sputtered once before roaring to life. She climbed out, reaching into her coat pocket. What do I owe you? Hank waved her off, already straddling his bike. Nothing. Helping out's its own reward. Besides, I'd rather see you make it home safe than lighten your wallet. Her hand paused midair. A $20 bill crumpled between her fingers. Seriously? You don't even know me. Don't need to, he said simply. Folks around here look out for each other. Where you headed with all that stuff in the back anyway? He nodded toward the truck bed, piled high with boxes of canned goods and blankets. Sophia glanced over her shoulder, her expression shifting. Guarded, but not cold. The community center on Maple. They're short on supplies. Hank's face lit up, a spark of recognition in his hazel eyes. Maple Street? I know the place. Tell you what, I'll follow you there. Make sure this old bucket doesn't give up on you again. No arguing, he added, cutting off her protest with a playful grin. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, but only because I don't want to be stuck out here twice in one night. The drive was short, just a few miles through the quiet streets of their little suburb, the kind of place where porches still had rocking chairs and kids left their bikes in the yard. When they pulled into the community center's lot, Hank hopped off his bike and helped Sophia unload the boxes, his broad shoulders making light work of it. The center's director, a wiry woman named Ruth with a gray braid and a no-nonsense smile, poked her head out. Hank Wheeler, you old gearhead, what brings you here? Same as always, Ruth, he called back. Trouble finds me, and I fix it. Sophia watched the exchange, a flicker of curiosity stirring in her chest. There was more to this man than a wrench and a bike, she thought. A lot more. As they stacked the last box inside, she turned to him. You do this a lot, don't you? Helping people. Hank shrugged again, but there was a quiet pride in his voice. When I can. World's messy enough without folks turning their backs on each other. She didn't say anything, just nodded, but her eyes lingered on him as he pedaled off into the dusk, his silhouette fading against the fading light. Sophia climbed back into her truck, her fingers brushing the steering wheel. She hadn't told him the truth, not about the boxes, not about who she really was. Not yet, but something about Hank Wheeler made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd stumbled onto something worth keeping. The late September air carried a crisp edge as Hank Wheeler unlocked the side door to his garage, the familiar creak of the hinges greeting him like an old friend. The place wasn't much. A cinder block rectangle with a slanted roof, its walls lined with pegboards of tools and shelves of spare parts. But it was his. Sunlight streamed through the dusty window, catching flecks of grease on the concrete floor. He flipped on the radio, tuning it to WCOL for some classic country, letting Johnny Cash's baritone fill the space as he set to work on a lawnmower someone had dropped off last week. It was Wednesday, quiet as usual, and Hank liked it that way. Quiet gave a man room to think, or not think, depending on the day. He was elbow deep in the mower's engine, humming along to Ring of Fire, when the crunch of gravel outside snapped him out of his rhythm. Wiping his hands on a rag, he stepped to the open bay door and squinted into the morning light. There she was again. Sophia, the woman from the roadside, pulling up in that same beat-up Ford truck. Only this time, she wasn't alone in the cab. A kid's bike rattled in the truck bed, its front wheel bent like a pretzel. Hank raised a hand in greeting as she climbed out, her khaki coat swapped for a navy sweater that made her eyes look warmer somehow. Back so soon? He called, a grin tugging at his mouth. What did that truck do to you this time? Sophia offered a small smile, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. Not the truck today, she said, her voice carrying a trace of something. Nerves, maybe? It's this bike. I found it by the community center. Figured it could use some fixing up. Thought of you. He ambled over, peering into the truck bed. The bike was a mess. Rusty chain, warped rim, handlebars twisted like they'd lost a fight with a curb. Yeah, she's seen better days, he said, scratching the back of his neck where his ponytail brushed his collar. But I can work with it. No charge, of course. Kids around here deserve something to ride. Sophia nodded, watching as he hefted the bike down with a grunt. You're too generous, you know that? Most people would at least ask for a coffee or something. Coffee's nice, Hank said, setting the bike on his workbench, but I'd rather see a kid's face light up than sip a latte. Besides, I've got a pot brewing inside if you're offering. He winked, half joking, and turned to grab a wrench. She hesitated, then followed him into the garage, her boots tapping softly against the floor. You've got a good setup here, she said, glancing around at the organized chaos. Tools in neat rows, a faded Ohio State flag pinned to the wall, a stack of old hot rod magazines by the stool. How long you been doing this? Longer than I care to count, Hank replied, loosening the bike's front axle. Started helping my dad in his shop when I was 10. Took a detour to college for a bit. Thought I'd be an engineer, but life had other plans. He paused, his fingers stilling on the wrench. Mom got sick, so I came back. Been here ever since. Sophia leaned against the workbench, her arms crossed loosely. What happened to the engineer dream? Hank shrugged, his gaze fixed on the bike. Dreams change. Mom needed me more than I needed a degree. Alzheimer's took her slow, but I got to keep her laughing till the end. That's worth more than any diploma. His voice was steady, but there was a weight to it, a quiet ache he didn't bother hiding. She didn't press, just nodded, her eyes softening. That's a hell of a thing to do, Hank. Not everyone would. Had to, he said simply, then flashed a grin to lighten the mood. Anyway, enough about me spilling my guts. What about you? New in town, right? What brings you to our little slice of nowhere? Sophia's smile faltered, just for a second. Oh, you know, looking for a fresh start. Got tired of the city grind. It was a half-truth, and she knew it sounded rehearsed. Truth was, she'd spent the last 3 years running a supermarket empire from a glass-walled office in Chicago, watching her ex-husband squander half of it before she cut him loose. Now she was here, hiding in plain sight, testing the waters of a life where no one knew her name, or her net worth. Hank didn't push, just nodded like it made perfect sense. Fair enough. Cities will wear you down if you let them. You sticking around long? Long enough to get that bike fixed, I guess, she said, deflecting with a smile. She reached for the coffee pot on a rickety table by the wall, pouring 2 mugs without asking. Here, least I can do. He took the mug, their fingers brushing for a split second, a flicker of warmth that caught him off guard. Thanks, he said, sipping the black brew. You're all right, Sophia. Most folks don't bother sticking around to chat. Maybe I like the company, she replied, her tone teasing, but her eyes serious. She watched him work, the way his hands moved with a kind of grace, sure and steady, like he could fix anything if he tried hard enough. It stirred something in her, something she hadn't felt in years. Trust, maybe, or the promise of it. They fell into an easy rhythm, her handing him tools when he asked, him tossing out stories about the neighborhood, how he'd once rebuilt a go-kart for the Miller twins, or the time he'd stayed up all night fixing Ruth's van so the community center could make a food run. Sophia listened, soaking it in, filing away every detail. She'd come here to test him, to see if his kindness held up under scrutiny. So far it did, more than she'd expected. By noon, the bike was rolling again, new wheels scavenged from a parts bin, chain oiled, handlebars straightened. Hank stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. Good as new. You want to drop it off at the center, or should I? I'll take it, Sophia said, already lifting it into the truck. But thanks, Hank, really. Anytime, he said, meaning it. Door's always open. She drove off, the bike rattling in the back, but her mind wasn't on the road. It was on him, Hank Wheeler, the man who fixed things without asking why. She'd meant to keep her distance, to play this game of shadows a little longer. But as the garage faded in her rearview mirror, Sophia felt a tug she couldn't ignore. Maybe he wasn't the only one fixing something here. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to fix her too. One small, unexpected kindness at a time. The October wind swept through the streets of their quiet Ohio suburb, rattling the leaves into golden piles along the curbs. Hank Wheeler stood outside his garage, a broom in hand, sweeping the gravel lot more out of habit than necessity. The morning was cool, the kind that made his joints ache just enough to remind him he wasn't 30 anymore. He wore his usual flannel, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a faded Ohio State cap pulled low over his eyes. The radio crackled faintly from inside. George Strait singing about wide-open spaces. Fitting, Hank thought, for a man who'd spent most of his life in one small corner of the world. It had been a week since Sophia dropped off that kid's bike, and though he wouldn't admit it, he'd found himself glancing down County Road 12 more often than usual, half expecting that beat-up Ford to roll up again. There was something about her, those quick smiles, the way she listened like she really heard him, that stuck with him like a song you couldn't shake. He wasn't a man prone to daydreams, but she'd gotten under his skin, quiet as a shadow. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Sure enough, there she was, Sophia, stepping out of her truck with a cardboard box tucked under one arm. She waved, her navy scarf fluttering in the breeze, and Hank felt a flicker of warmth he hadn't expected. "Morning," he called, leaning the broom against the wall. "You turning my garage into a regular pit stop?" She grinned, setting the box on the workbench as she stepped inside. "Something like that. Found this old radio at a thrift shop. Thought it might need your magic touch. It's for the community center. Ruth keeps complaining about the static on theirs." Hank peered into the box, lifting out a scuffed-up transistor radio that looked like it had survived the Nixon era. "Huh, a real relic," he said, turning it over in his hands. "I can fix it up. No problem. Might even get her to pick up something besides static and bad news." "You're a miracle worker," Sophia said, settling onto the stool by the coffee pot. She poured herself a mug, then slid one across to him without asking. A small ritual that was starting to feel familiar. "How's that bike holding up?" "Good as gold," Hank replied, popping the radio's back panel off with a screwdriver. "Saw little Tommy Miller riding it yesterday, grinning ear to ear. Makes it worth the busted knuckles." She nodded, sipping her coffee, but her eyes lingered on him a beat too long. She'd been coming around more lately, first the bike, now this radio, and Hank couldn't quite figure her out. She didn't talk much about herself, just dropped these little jobs in his lap like breadcrumbs. Part of him liked it, the company, the quiet way she fit into his mornings. But another part, the part that had learned to spot trouble a mile off, wondered what she wasn't saying. As he worked, fiddling with the radio's wiring, the garage door rattled open wider, and Joe Baxter shuffled in. Joe was Hank's oldest friend, 58, bald as a cue ball, with a belly that testified to too many beers at the VFW hall. "Well, look at this," Joe said, smirking as he clocked Sophia. "Hank's got himself a regular customer." "What's this? Third time this month?" "Second," Hank corrected, not looking up from the radio. "And she's bringing work. Not trouble, so lay off, huh?" Joe chuckled, plopping onto a folding chair. "Work, sure. Pretty lady like that, though? I'd say she's trouble of the best kind. What's your story, darling? You a mechanic groupie or just lost?" Sophia's smile tightened, but she played along. "Just passing through, I guess. Hank's been kind enough to help me out." "Kind's his middle name," Joe said, winking at Hank. "Too kind if you ask me. Watch out. He'll fix your whole life if you let him." Hank shot Joe a look, half amused, half warning, before turning back to the radio. "Ignore him. He's got a mouth bigger than his brain." Sophia laughed, but Joe's words lingered in the air, stirring something restless in her. She'd come here to test Hank, to see if his kindness was real or just a front. So far, it held up. Every tool he lent, every story he shared, every time he waved off payment with that easy grin. But Joe's teasing planted a seed of doubt, not in Hank, but in herself. Was she pushing too far, poking at something good just to see if it'd break? The afternoon wore on, Joe eventually wandering off with a promise to bring Hank a burger later. Sophia stayed, handing Hank pliers when he asked, watching as he coaxed a faint hum from the radio. She was about to head out when she accidentally bumped her coat off the stool, a leather wallet tumbling out of the pocket onto the floor. Hank bent to pick it up, his fingers brushing a crumpled 20 and a business card that slipped loose. A sleek thing, with a logo he vaguely recognized, some big supermarket chain, and a name, Sophia Grayson, CEO. He froze just for a second, then handed it back, keeping his voice casual. "Drop this. You ought to be more careful. Don't want some punk snagging your cash." Sophia took it, her heart thudding as she stuffed it back in her pocket. "Thanks," she said, forcing a smile. "Clumsy today." He nodded, turning back to the radio like it was nothing, but his mind churned. CEO. That didn't square with the woman hauling thrift shop radios in a rusty truck. Maybe it was old from a past life, or maybe she wasn't who she seemed. Either way, he didn't ask, didn't want to. People had their reasons, and he'd learned long ago not to pry unless they offered. Got it, he said, flipping the radio switch. A staticky version of Sweet Caroline crackled through, and he grinned. Good enough for Ruth to sing along to, at least. Sophia laughed, the tension easing from her shoulders. You're a lifesaver, Hank. I'll drop it off tomorrow. Take your time, he said, walking her to the truck. And hey, if you find any more junk to fix, you know where I am. She climbed in, waving as she pulled away. But the wallet incident gnawed at her. He'd seen the card, she was sure of it. And he hadn't blinked. Why? Most people would have asked, probed, maybe even gotten starry-eyed over the title. But not Hank. He just handed it back, like it didn't change a damn thing. As the garage shrank in her rear view, Sophia gripped the wheel tighter. She'd come here to test his heart, to see if kindness like his could hold up. Now she wondered if she was the one being tested, and if she'd pass. The first frost of the season glittered on the grass outside Hank Wheeler's garage, turning the Ohio morning into a quiet, crystalline world. Inside, the space heater hummed softly, battling the chill as Hank hunched over a carburetor, his breath fogging faintly in the air. He'd swapped his flannel for a worn Carhartt jacket, the kind that had seen him through decades of winters, its pockets stuffed with spare bolts and a half-empty pack of gum. The radio played low, Willie Nelson crooning about Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, and Hank let the melody wash over him, a steady companion to his thoughts. It had been a few days since Sophia's last visit, the one with the thrift shop radio and that business card he hadn't meant to see. Sophia Grayson, CEO. The words rattled around in his head longer than he cared to admit, but he tucked them away, same as he did with most things that didn't add up. Life was too short for puzzles he hadn't been asked to solve. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling she'd be back. Her truck's rumble had become a sound he half listened for now, whether he liked it or not. The community center weighed heavier on his mind today. Ruth had called last night, her voice tight with worry. Donations were drying up, bills piling higher than the canned goods they could stock. We might not make it to Christmas, Hank, she'd said, and he'd heard the defeat she tried to hide. He'd hung up promising to figure something out, but the truth was, his own pockets were as lean as the center's pantry. The thought gnawed at him, a dull ache he couldn't fix with a wrench. Mid-morning, he stepped outside to stretch his legs, the frost crunching under his boots. That's when he saw it, a stack of old spark plugs and oil filters he'd meant to sell, shoved in a corner by the dumpster. Not much, but maybe enough. He hauled them to the workbench, sorting through the mess with a plan forming. A quick call to Joe confirmed it. The auto shop in town would take them for $50, cash. It wasn't a fortune, but it'd buy a few bags of groceries for Ruth's shelves. He loaded the parts into a crate, his jaw set. Small steps, he told himself. That's how you kept going. The bay door rattled open just as he finished, and there was Sophia, her truck idling behind her. She carried a canvas bag this time, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Hey, she said, stepping inside with that half smile he was starting to know too well. Got something else for you to fix. This lamp's been flickering like a bad horror movie. Hank took the bag, peering at the chipped brass lamp inside. Looks like a wiring job. Easy enough, he said, setting it down. You're keeping me busy, Sophia. What's next? A toaster? She laughed, brushing frost from her scarf. Maybe. You're too good at this to let idle. He grunted, pleased despite himself, and poured her a coffee from the pot. They settled into their usual dance, her perched on the stool, him tinkering. But the air felt different today, heavier. Maybe it was the frost, or Ruth's call, or that damn card still lurking in his memory. Whatever it was, Hank couldn't shake the urge to do more than fix lamps and bikes. You ever been to the community center when it's busy? He asked, stripping the lamp's cord with a pocket knife. Kids running around, folks swapping stories. It's a good place. Been struggling lately, though. Sophia sipped her coffee, her eyes narrowing slightly. Yeah? What's going on? Money, he said bluntly. Always is. Ruth's holding it together, but they're one bad month from closing. Hate to see it go dark. Means too much to too many. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the frost-lined window. That's rough. Places like that, they're lifelines. You helping them out? Trying, Hank said, his voice quieter. Sold some junk this morning. $50 for the food bank. Not much, but it's something. He didn't mention how he'd skipped his own grocery run to make it happen, or how the math still didn't add up. Didn't need to. She wasn't here for his sob story. Sophia's fingers tightened around her mug, a flicker of something, guilt, crossing her face. She'd seen the crates outside when she pulled up, seen the way he moved like a man carrying more than just parts. She'd meant to keep testing him, dropping these little jobs to gauge his limits. But this was different. $50 from his own pocket for a place he didn't even run? That wasn't just kind. That was bone deep. $50 is more than nothing, she said, her tone careful. Most people wouldn't bother. Most people don't know what it's like to need a hand, he replied, snipping a wire with a steady hand. I do. Mom used to say you give what you can, even if it's just a smile. Keeps the world spinning. Sophia swallowed, the warmth of the coffee doing little to ease the chill creeping up her spine. She'd spent years building a fortune, millions she could wire to that center with a phone call. But here she was, playing pauper, watching a man scrape by to help others. It hit her harder than she expected, a sharp twist in her chest she couldn't name. Then came the moment that tipped the scale. She'd stepped outside to grab a wrench from her truck, another test she'd rigged, when her phone rang. She answered without thinking, turning away from the garage. Yeah, it's me, she said, her voice low. No, I'm not in Chicago. Look, just handle the financials. I need this sorted by next week. She hung up fast, but not fast enough. Hank had wandered to the doorway, a rag in hand, and caught every word. He didn't say anything, just watched her climb back in with the wrench. Everything okay? He asked, his tone even. Yeah, she lied, handing him the tool. Just family stuff. Hank nodded, but his eyes lingered on her a second too long. Financials? Next week? That didn't sound like family, or like someone new in town with a thrift shop lamp. The card flashed in his mind again, CEO, and for the first time, he let himself wonder. Not out loud, though. Instead, he said, if you ever need a hand, not just with lamps, you let me know. I'm no good with phones, but I can listen. Sophia froze, her breath catching. He meant it. God help her. He meant it. And she didn't know whether to run or stay. Thanks, she managed, her voice thick. I'll keep that in mind. As he turned back to the lamp, humming along to Willie, Sophia stared at the frost outside. She'd come to test his kindness, but now it was testing her, blowing cold and clear through the cracks she'd spent years sealing shut. The sky over Ohio hung heavy with gray clouds, the kind that promised rain, but held off just to keep folks guessing. Inside Hank Wheeler's garage, the air smelled of oil and damp concrete, the space heater buzzing like a tired old dog. Hank stood at his workbench, a pair of pliers in hand, wrestling with the innards of Sophia's thrift shop lamp. The brass gleamed under his touch, but his mind wasn't on the wiring. It was on Ruth's call last night, another plea about the community center, her voice cracking as she tallied up the days they had left. And it was on Sophia, too, her truck, her quiet way of slipping into his mornings, that phone call he'd overheard yesterday. Financials. Next week. The pieces didn't fit, and Hank wasn't sure he wanted them to. He just tightened the lamp's last screw when the bay door rattled, and there she was, Sophia, stepping in with her navy scarf wound tight against the chill. She carried a thermos this time, steam curling from the lid as she set it down. Thought you could use something warmer than that coffee, she said, her smile soft but her eyes guarded. It's hot cocoa, my one kitchen trick. Hank grinned, setting the pliers aside. Well, damn, you're spoiling me now. Thanks. He took the thermos, pouring a mugful, the rich scent cutting through the garage's usual grit. Lamp's done, by the way. Flicker's gone. Should light up Ruth's office like the 4th of July. Sophia nodded, settling onto the stool. You're a saint, Hank. She's lucky to have you. Nah, he said, sipping the cocoa. It was good, sweet with a hint of cinnamon, and it warmed him more than the heater ever could. Just doing what I can. Speaking of, Ruth's in a bind. Center's down to its last dime. I'm thinking of hauling some scrap to the yard tomorrow. See if I can scrape together a little more. Her fingers tightened around her own mug, a flicker of unease crossing her face. You're selling more stuff? After those parts last week? Gotta, he said, shrugging like it was nothing. Folks need that place. Kids, old-timers, people who don't have much else. Can't let it go under without a fight. Sophia stared at him, her breath catching. She'd seen the crates he'd sold, heard the way he talked about giving what he could. But this, stripping his own garage bare for a cause that wasn't even his? It hit her like a cold splash, sharp and sobering. She'd spent years signing checks with 6 zeros, yet here was Hank, giving what little he had without a second thought. Her test, those bikes, lamps, little jobs, felt small now, petty even. You don't have to do that alone, she said, her voice quieter. I could help. Maybe, I don't know, pitch in somehow. Hank raised an eyebrow, surprised but not pushing. Appreciate it, but I'm good. You've got your own stuff going on. Family, right? That call yesterday sounded heavy. Her stomach dropped, the cocoa turning bitter on her tongue. He'd heard more than she'd thought, enough to poke holes in her story. She forced a laugh, brushing it off. Oh, that? Just my brother, nagging me about some bills. Nothing big. He nodded, but his eyes held hers a beat too long, steady and searching. All right, just checking. You ever need to unload, doors open. She smiled, tight and quick, and stood to pace the garage, pretending to study the Ohio State flag on the wall. Her mind raced. She'd come here to test him, to prove something. To herself, maybe. But the lies were piling up, and Hank wasn't the kind to let them slide forever. She needed to pivot, to keep this going without cracking wide open. Hey, she said, turning back. Why don't I take you to the center tomorrow? Drop off the lamp, see what's what. I'll buy you a burger after. Call it a thank you. Hank leaned back, wiping his hands on his jeans. A burger, huh? You drive a hard bargain. Sure, I'm in. Been a while since I had a decent patty. Deal, she said, relieved to shift the focus. But the relief didn't last. The next day dawned damp and gray, the kind of weather that seeped into your bones. Hank locked up the garage, the lamp tucked under his arm, and climbed into Sophia's truck. The ride to Maple Street was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of her radio. Tuned to NPR, he noted, not country. Odd for a woman who hauled thrift junk in a rusty Ford, but he didn't comment. The community center buzzed with subdued chaos when they arrived. Kids chasing each other around folding tables. Ruth barking orders over a stack of paperwork. She lit up when she saw Hank. My hero, she called, hugging him as he handed over the lamp. This'll brighten my desk at least. Blame Sophia, Hank said, nodding her way. Her find, my fix. Ruth turned, sizing Sophia up with a warm grin. Well, thank you, hun. We need all the angels we can get. Sophia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wandered the room as Hank chatted with Ruth, her gaze lingering on the bare shelves, the cracked linoleum, the weary faces. This wasn't just a place. It was a lifeline, like he'd said, and it was dying. Later, over burgers at Dusty's Diner, Hank broke the silence. So, what did you think? Worth saving, right? Yeah, she said, picking at her fries. It's real. You're right. They need it. He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. Glad you see it. Been part of this town forever. Hate to lose it. She opened her mouth to say more, but her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it until it buzzed again, insistent. Sorry, she muttered, stepping outside to take it. Hank watched through the window as she paced, her voice rising just enough for him to catch fragments. No, I said I'm handling it. Yes, the center. Look, I'll call you back. She came back in, her face tight. Brother again? Hank asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. Yeah, she lied, too fast. He's a pain. Hank set his burger down, leaning forward. Sophia, I'm not one to pry, but you're a lousy liar. That call yesterday, now this. What's going on? You don't owe me the truth. But I don't like being played either. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The diner's hum faded, leaving just his steady gaze and the weight of her own words. She'd pushed too far, and he'd seen through her, straight through to the cracks she'd patched with half-truths. Hank, She faltered, then squared her shoulders. You're right. I've been off. Can we talk somewhere else? He studied her, then nodded. Garage. Now. The drive back was silent, the lamp rattling in the back. Inside the garage, she faced him, her voice low. I'm not who you think, but I'm not ready to explain. Not yet. Can you trust me? Just a little longer? Hank crossed his arms, his jaw tight. I don't trust easy when folks dodge. But yeah, I'll wait. Don't make me regret it. She nodded, her throat burning. The lie had broken open. Not all the way, but enough. And as she left, the cold wind felt like it was blowing right through her. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the tin roof of Hank Wheeler's garage, the sound a soft counterpoint to the low hum of the space heater. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and motor oil, the kind of smell that clung to Hank's Carhartt jacket as he stood at his workbench. He wasn't fixing anything tonight, just staring at a rusted wrench, turning it over in his hands like it might tell him something he didn't already know. The clock on the wall read 8:17, its red digits glowing faintly in the dim light. Outside, the Ohio night pressed close, wet and heavy. It had been 2 days since Sophia's half-confession in the garage, her words still echoing in his head. I'm not who you think. Can you trust me? Just a little longer? He'd said yes, against his better judgment, but it didn't sit right. Hank wasn't a man who liked loose ends. Give him a busted engine, he'd tear it down and build it back up. Every bolt in place. People, though? People were messier, and Sophia was proving to be the messiest puzzle he'd tackled in years. The community center was the real weight, though. Ruth had called again that morning, her voice thinner than ever. We're out of time, Hank, she'd said. Landlord's giving us till the end of the month. 2 weeks, tops. He'd hung up with a knot in his gut, knowing $50 in scrap wouldn't cut it anymore. There was one card left to play, his dad's old Chevy pickup, parked under a tarp out back. It was a '67, cherry red once, now faded to rust and memory. He'd rebuilt it with his father decades ago, piece by piece, a keepsake he'd sworn never to sell. But now it was a lifeline, or could be if he let it go. He tossed the wrench onto the bench, the clatter sharp against the rain, and grabbed a flashlight. Outside, the tarp flapped in the wind as he peeled it back, revealing the truck's battered curves. Rain streaked the hood, pooling in the dents. Sorry, Pop, he muttered, running a hand along the fender. Gotta do it. The auto shop would give him a few hundred, maybe 5 if he haggled. Enough to buy Ruth another month, maybe 2. It had hurt like hell, but he'd hurt worse and survived. Back inside, he was shaking water from his cap when headlights cut through the rain. Sophia's Ford, pulling up slow and deliberate. She stepped out, an umbrella shielding her from the downpour, and ducked into the garage with a shiver. Hey, she said, her voice soft but unsteady. Didn't expect to find you here this late. Couldn't sleep, Hank replied, wiping his hands on a rag. Rain's good for thinking. What about you? What's got you out in this mess? She set the umbrella by the door, her scarf dripping onto the floor. Same, I guess. Thinking. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her eyes catching the light. I owe you an apology, Hank. For the other day, the diner, the garage. I wasn't straight with you and you didn't deserve that. He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. You said you'd explain when you're ready. I'm still waiting. But yeah, I don't like games. Never have. Sophia nodded, her jaw tight. I know, and I'm not playing one. Not anymore. She took a breath, steadying herself. I saw what you're doing out there. The truck. You're selling it, aren't you? For the center. Hank's brow furrowed, caught off guard. How'd you? Saw the tarp, she said, cutting in. And I've seen you. How you give when you've got nothing left to give. I can't let you do that alone. He straightened, his voice sharpening. It's my call, Sophia. Not yours. I don't need pity. I've got this. It's not pity, she shot back, her tone firm. It's respect and maybe guilt. She paused, her hands twisting together. I sent money to the center, anonymous, through a friend. Enough to keep it afloat a while. Ruth doesn't know it's me, and I don't want her to. But you should. Hank stared at her, the words sinking in slow and heavy. You? What? How much? Enough, she said, her voice dropping. 5,000? It's done. 5,000? He stepped back, his cap hitting the floor as he ran a hand through his damp hair. Jesus, Sophia, where the hell do you get that kind of cash? Who are you? She flinched but didn't look away. I told you I'm not who you think. I've got money, more than I know what to do with some days. But I didn't want you to know. Not like this. I wanted to see... She faltered, her eyes glistening. I wanted to see if you were real. If people like you still exist. Hank's chest tightened, a mix of anger and something softer he couldn't name. So this was a test? The bikes, the lamp, all of it. You've been playing me to see if I jump through hoops? No, she said, stepping closer, her voice breaking. It started that way. God, I'm sorry. But it's not that now. You're not a game, Hank. You're the best thing I've stumbled into in years, and I've been too scared to admit it. He turned away, staring at the rain-streaked window, his hands clenched. I don't know what to do with that. You drop this on me, $5,000, some secret life, and expect me to just nod and smile? I'm not built for that, Sophia. I don't expect anything, she said, her voice raw. I just needed you to know, and I couldn't let you lose that truck. Not when I could stop it. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the rain's steady drum. Hank's mind churned. $5,000. A truck he didn't have to sell. A woman who'd lied but maybe hadn't meant to hurt. He'd trusted her against his gut, and now here she was, peeling back layers he hadn't asked to see. But that truck, it was still his, because of her. And Ruth's voice wouldn't crack tomorrow. He turned back, his gaze steady. You should have told me sooner. But thanks. For the center. Doesn't mean I'm okay with the rest. Not yet. She nodded, tears brimming but not falling. I know, I'll go. Just don't hate me, Hank. Please. I don't hate easy, he said, softer now. Just need time to figure this out. She grabbed her umbrella and stepped into the rain, her silhouette fading into the dark. Hank stood there, the thermos of cocoa still warm on the bench, the truck safe under its tarp. Dawn was hours off, but something had shifted, a crack in the darkness, letting in a sliver of light he wasn't sure he'd earned. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the Ohio air sharp and clean, the kind that smelled of wet earth and second chances. Hank Wheeler stood outside his garage, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hands, his breath fogging in the early chill. The tarp over his dad's Chevy glimmered with dew, untouched since last night's decision, or Sophia's decision, really. $5,000. The number still rattled in his skull, a lifeline he hadn't asked for, tied to a woman he wasn't sure he knew anymore. He'd slept fitfully, the rain's echo replaced by her voice. You're the best thing I've stumbled into in years. It stuck with him, a burr he couldn't shake. Inside, the garage felt emptier without her shadow by the workbench. Hank flipped on the radio, Merle Haggard this time, singing about lonesome fugitives, and set to work on a busted alternator, hoping the rhythm of it would quiet his head. It didn't. Every turn of the wrench brought her back. The way she'd stood there in the rain, eyes pleading, asking for trust he wasn't sure he could give. He'd told her he needed time, and he meant it, but time wasn't making this any clearer. Mid-morning the phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. Ruth's voice crackled through, brighter than it had been in weeks. Hank, you won't believe it. Someone dropped a miracle on us. $5,000, anonymous, wired straight to the landlord. We're good through spring, maybe longer. Hank gripped the receiver, his knuckles whitening. Damn, Ruth, that's incredible. You're sure it's solid? Solid as steel, she said, laughing. I don't know who our angel is, but I'm thanking every star I've got. You coming by later? We're throwing a little thank you party. Nothing fancy, just coffee and donuts. Yeah, he said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. I'll be there. He hung up, staring at the phone like it might explain itself. Sophia. She'd done it, just like she'd said. Saved the center without taking a bow. It should have felt good, but it twisted something in him instead. Why hide it? Why play this game at all? He was still chewing on that when her truck rolled up an hour later, the engine's rumble cutting through Merle's last chorus. Sophia stepped out, her navy sweater swapped for a gray one, her scarf missing. She carried a kid's bike, another fixer-upper, this one with a flat tire and a bent pedal. Hey, she said, pausing at the bay door. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. Hank set the alternator down, wiping his hands on his jeans. Door's open, isn't it? His tone was gruff, but not cold. What's with the bike? Found it by the park, she said, setting it down. Thought maybe we could fix it together, if you're up for it. He studied her, the way she stood there, tentative, but not backing off. All right, he said finally, nodding to the workbench. Grab a wrench. Let's see what we've got. They worked in silence at first, the clink of tools filling the space where words didn't. Hank patched the tire while Sophia straightened the pedal, her hands steady despite the tension between them. It was her move that broke the quiet. She reached for the coffee pot, pouring 2 mugs and slid one over. I meant what I said last night, she started, her voice low. I'm sorry, Hank. For the lies, the dodging. I owe you more than that. He took the mug, his fingers brushing hers, and leaned back against the bench. You saved the center. Ruth called, singing your praises without even knowing it. Why not tell her? Why the cloak and dagger? Sophia exhaled, staring into her coffee. Because it wasn't about me. It was about them. And you. I didn't want it to be a headline, some rich lady swooping in. I wanted it to mean something real. She paused, her eyes meeting his. And I didn't want you to think I was buying your trust. I've got money, Hank, more than I'll ever need, but it's not who I am. Not anymore. He sipped his coffee, letting her words settle. So who are you then? 'Cause I'm still figuring that out. CEO on a card, hauling junk in a truck. You're a damn riddle. She smiled, small and sad. I was a CEO, ran a supermarket chain out of Chicago, built it from nothing, lost half of it to a cheating ex, and walked away 3 years ago. Came here to, I don't know, start over. See if people could care about me without the zeros attached. That's why I tested you. Stupid, maybe, but I had to know. Hank's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. And what did you find? You, she said simply. Someone who'd give his last dime, or his dad's truck, for folks he barely knows. I didn't expect that. Didn't expect you. He set his mug down, crossing his arms. I'm no saint, Sophia. I'm just a guy who fixes things. But yeah, that truck, it's my old man's. Was gonna sell it to keep Ruth afloat. You beat me to it. Her breath hitched. I'm glad I did. You shouldn't have to lose that. Maybe not, he said, his voice quieter. But I don't like being in the dark. You should have told me. Before the money. Before all this. I know, she said, stepping closer. I was scared. Scared you'd see me different or walk away. I'm not good at this, trusting people. But I want to be, with you. The rain's echo lingered in his mind, but her words cut through it, raw and real. Hank rubbed his neck, the weight of the last few days shifting. All right, he said finally. No more tests, no more secrets. We fix this bike, then we talk, really talk. Deal? Deal, she said, a spark of relief in her eyes. She hesitated, then added, There's a party at the center tonight. Ruth's celebrating. Come with me? He chuckled, the sound low and warm. Donuts and coffee? Twist my arm, why don't you? Yeah, I'm in. They finished the bike as the afternoon faded, the tire patched, the pedal straight. Hank wheeled it out, testing it on the gravel, and Sophia watched, her heart lighter than it had been in months. At the center that evening, Ruth greeted them with hugs and a tray of powdered donuts, the room buzzing with laughter and relief. Hank stood by Sophia, his shoulder brushing hers, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. Looks good, doesn't it? He said, nodding at the crowd. Kids with sticky fingers, old-timers swapping stories. Yeah, she replied, her voice soft. It does. The door had opened again, not just the garages, but something deeper. And as the rain cleared outside, Hank felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't dared name, a chance to fix more than just machines. November swept into Ohio with a quiet grace, the trees shedding their last leaves in a golden drift across Hank Wheeler's gravel lot. The garage stood sturdy against the cooling days, its bay door open to catch the late afternoon sun. Inside, the air hummed with the familiar. Motor oil, coffee, and the crackle of Hank's radio, now tuned to a local station playing Patsy Cline's velvet voice. Hank stood at his workbench, a socket wrench in hand, tightening bolts on a kid's tricycle he'd promised to fix for the Millers down the street. His Carhartt jacket hung on a hook, leaving him in a faded flannel that rolled up to his elbows, his ponytail brushing his collar as he worked. It had been a week since the community center party, since Sophia's confession had cracked open the space between them. No more secrets, she'd promised, and Hank had taken her at her word. Not because it was easy, but because he wanted to. She'd been around more since then, not just dropping off thrift shop finds, but staying, helping, filling the garage with a presence he hadn't realized he'd missed. Today, she'd called ahead, said she was bringing something special, whatever that meant. Hank didn't mind the mystery this time. He was starting to trust the way she surprised him. The rumble of her Ford cut through Patsy's lament, and Sophia pulled up, stepping out with a cardboard box tucked under her arm. She wore a gray sweater and jeans, her scarf swapped for a knit cap that framed her face in soft wool. Hey, she called, her breath fogging in the crisp air. Hope you're ready for this. Hank grinned, setting the wrench down. Depends. Is it another lamp, or are you testing me with a toaster now? She laughed, the sound bright against the quiet lot, and set the box on the workbench. Better, open it. He peeled back the flaps, revealing a jumble of string lights, white bulbs tangled with green wire, the kind folks draped over porches at Christmas. Huh, he said, lifting a strand. What's the plan here? You turning my garage into a winter wonderland? Something like that, Sophia said, her eyes sparkling. The center's doing a little holiday kickoff next week. Nothing big, just lights and hot cider. Ruth asked if we could spruce up the outside. I figured we could test them here first. Make sure they work. Hank nodded, already untangling the mess. Smart. Last thing Ruth needs is a busted light show. Grab that stool. We'll plug them in and see what we've got. They fell into an easy rhythm, Sophia unraveling strands while Hank checked the bulbs, replacing the burnt-out ones with spares from his junk drawer. The garage filled with a soft glow as they strung the lights along the walls, looping them over nails he'd hammered in years ago for no reason he could recall. It was simple work, the kind that didn't demand much but gave back more than it took. Patsy sang on, her voice weaving through their quiet chatter. Hank teasing her about her knot-tying skills, Sophia firing back that he'd lose a light stringing contest to any kid with a ladder. Halfway through, she paused, holding a glowing strand. You ever think about decorating this place for yourself? Not just for Ruth, but, for you. Hank shrugged, clipping a wire. Never saw the point. It's a garage. Folks come here to fix stuff, not admire the view. Besides, I'm not big on fuss. Maybe, she said, her tone thoughtful. But it's more than that, isn't it? This place, it's yours. You've made it a home for half the town. Why not make it shine a little? He looked up, caught by the way she said it, not pushing, just wondering. The lights cast a warm sheen across her face, softening the lines he hadn't noticed before. Guess I never thought about it like that, he admitted, setting the pliers down. Always been about keeping it running, not dressing it up. Sophia smiled, looping the strand higher. Well, it's running fine. Maybe it's time to let it glow. Her words lingered as they finished, the garage now a patchwork of light. Imperfect, a little lopsided, but alive in a way it hadn't been. Hank stepped back, hands on his hips, and let out a low whistle. Not bad. Ruth'll flip when she sees these. She'd better, Sophia said, brushing dust from her hands. But I meant what I said. This is for you, too. You deserve it. He didn't answer right away, just watched the bulbs flicker against the cinder block walls. She was right. It did feel different, warmer somehow. Not just the lights, but her being here, her hands next to his. He cleared his throat, reaching for the coffee pot. You sticking around? Got some oil to change on that trike. Could use an extra pair of eyes. Only if you teach me, she said, taking the mug he offered. I'm no mechanic, but I'm a quick study. Deal, he said, and they set to work, Sophia handing him tools as he walked her through, draining the oil, her questions sharp and curious. She laughed when he smeared grease on his cheek, and he caught himself smiling, really smiling for the first time in days. It was small, this moment, but it built on itself, layer by layer, like the lights on the wall. Later, as dusk settled, she pulled a sandwich from her bag, ham and Swiss, cut in half, and handed him a piece. Dinner, she said, settling onto the stool. Figured we earned it. Hank took it, their fingers brushing, and sat beside her, the trike gleaming under the lights. You keep feeding me like this, I'll start expecting it, he teased, but his voice softened. Thanks, Sophia, for today. This means more than you know. She looked at him, her eyes steady. It's mutual, Hank. You've given me more than I can say. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, warm, like the garage itself. They ate under the glow, the radio fading to static as the station signed off. Hank glanced at her, the way she fit here, and felt something shift. A door creaking open wider than he'd planned. He didn't say it, didn't need to, but he wondered if she felt it too. This wasn't just about fixing things anymore. It was about building something new. As she drove off, waving through the truck's window, the lights stayed on, casting a soft halo over the lot. Hank stood there, sandwich in hand, and watched her go. The garage wasn't just his anymore. It was theirs in a way he couldn't quite name, but didn't want to lose. The evening air in Ohio carried the faintest bite of winter, a chill that sharpened the stars above Hank Wheeler's garage. The string lights from last week still glowed along the walls, casting a warm halo over the gravel lot where the community center's holiday kickoff had spilled over. Ruth had insisted on moving the party here after the center's heater sputtered out. Said Hank's place had more heart anyway. Now, folding tables lined the space, topped with thermoses of cider and trays of sugar cookies, while a portable speaker blared Bing Crosby's smooth croon. Kids darted around, chasing each other with mittened hands, and old-timers like Joe Baxter swapped stories by the tailgate of Hank's Chevy, still safe under its tarp. Hank stood near the workbench, a mug of cider in hand, his Carhartt jacket zipped against the cold. He watched the crowd with a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't his scene, not really, but seeing Ruth's grin and the kids' laughter made it worth opening the doors. Sophia moved through the chaos with an ease that surprised him, pouring cider, handing out cookies, her gray sweater flecked with sugar from a spilled tray. She'd been here all afternoon helping set up, and Hank couldn't deny it. She fit. Not just in the garage, but in this messy, loud slice of his life. She caught his eye across the lot, weaving through the crowd to join him. You're hiding, she teased, her breath fogging as she held up a cookie shaped like a star. Thought you might need some fuel. Hank took it, his fingers brushing hers, and chuckled. Not hiding, just watching. You're the one running this show. Ruth's calling you her deputy now. Sophia grinned, leaning against the workbench. I'll take it. She's a force. Kept me on my toes all day. But this? She gestured at the lights, the people, the glow. This is good, Hank. Really good. Yeah, he said, his voice softer. It is. He sipped his cider, the cinnamon warming his throat, and glanced at her. You didn't have to do all this, you know. The lights, the party. Could have just dropped the cash and walked away. Her smile faded, but her eyes stayed steady. I could have, but I didn't want to. This matters. To them, to you, and to me. She paused, tucking a strand of hair under her knit cap. I've spent years walking away from things. I'm tired of it. Hank nodded, letting her words sink in. He'd heard her story last week. The Chicago Empire, the X, the search for something real. But hearing it and feeling it were different. She wasn't just here to fix bikes anymore. She was here for this, for him. It stirred something deep, a flicker of warmth he hadn't let himself name. The speaker shifted to a slower tune. Moonlight in Vermont, all strings and longing, and Joe, half lit on cider, hollered, "Hank, get out here! Show us those dance moves you swore you had in Nam." Hank groaned, but Sophia laughed, grabbing his arm. "Come on, you heard the man. One dance. I'll save you from the crowd after." "Fine," he muttered, setting his mug down. "But I'm blaming you if I step on your toes." He let her pull him into the open space by the tables, the gravel crunching under his boots. The crowd parted, a few kids giggling, and Hank slid an arm around her waist, his other hand finding hers. He wasn't smooth, never had been, but he knew the basics, swaying to the music with a rhythm born more from memory than grace. Sophia followed, her hand warm in his, her laughter close enough to feel. "You're not bad," she said, her voice low. "Where'd you learn this?" "Mom," he said, spinning her slow. "She dragged me around the kitchen when I was a kid. Said every man needs one dance in his pocket. Guess it stuck." "She was right," Sophia replied, her eyes catching the light. "It's perfect." The song stretched on, and the crowd faded to a hum. Ruth clapping, Joe whooping, but Hank barely heard it. It was just them, the stars, the music. He hadn't danced since his mom's last good Christmas, years before the Alzheimer's took her slow and quiet. Back then, he'd been a son, a caretaker, not a man who let himself want. Now with Sophia's hand in his, he wondered if maybe he could again. The song ended and the crowd cheered, but Hank didn't let go right away. "You're trouble," he said, half smiling, "dragging me out like that." "Worth it," she shot back, stepping back but not far. "You needed it." He didn't argue, couldn't really. They drifted back to the workbench and Sophia pulled a folded napkin from her pocket, handing it to him. "Found this in the truck. Thought you might want it back." Hank unfolded it, his breath catching. It was a sketch, rough, penciled lines of a garage with a slanted roof, tools scattered around, a bike in the corner. He'd drawn it years ago, a half-baked dream of fixing up the place, scribbled on a diner napkin and forgotten. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, his voice thick. "Under the seat," she said, watching him. "It's good, Hank, really good. You ever think about making it real?" He stared at the sketch, the lines blurred by time but sharp in his memory. "Once, long time ago. Thought I'd expand, make it a real shop, maybe teach kids how to fix stuff. Never got around to it." "Why not?" she pressed, her tone gentle but firm. "Life," he said, folding the napkin back. "Mom got sick, money got tight. Dreams like that, they wait." Sophia stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't have to. Not anymore. I see it, Hank. This place, what it could be. With you. With us." He looked at her, the lights reflecting in her eyes, and felt the ground shift. United States. The word hung there, heavy and bright, a promise he hadn't dared imagine. "You're serious," he said, not a question. "Dead serious," she replied. "I've run from enough. I want to build something. Here, with you. If you'll let me." Hank's throat tightened, the napkin crumpling in his hand. He'd spent years fixing things for others, keeping his own wants small, safe. But here was Sophia, offering more. Not just money, but a dream, a partnership. He didn't have words for it, not yet, so he reached for her hand instead, holding it tight under the Ohio sky. "All right," he said finally, his voice rough. "Let's talk about it. Really talk. Tomorrow." She squeezed his hand back, tears brimming but not falling. Tomorrow. The party spun on around them, but for Hank it was just this. The lights, the stars, and her. A door he'd long kept shut swung wide, and for the first time he stepped through. The first light of December crept over the Ohio horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a gentle promise after weeks of gray. Hank Wheeler stood outside his garage, hands stuffed in the pockets of his Carhartt jacket, watching the sunrise spill across the gravel lot. The string lights still hung along the walls, their glow faded now against the dawn, but the warmth they'd brought lingered in his bones. Beside him, under its tarp, the '67 Chevy gleamed faintly. Still his, still here, a quiet anchor in a world that felt new. Inside, the garage was alive with purpose. The workbench held a fresh project, a small bike frame, stripped down and waiting for paint, a gift Hank had started for Tommy Miller's birthday next week. The radio sat silent for once, replaced by the soft clatter of tools and the murmur of voices. Sophia was there, perched on the stool, a pencil tucked behind her ear as she sketched on a notepad. She'd come early, coffee thermos in tow, and they'd spent the morning talking. Not just about the bike, but about everything. The napkin sketch from last night, his dream of a bigger garage, her vision of building something together. It wasn't a plan yet, just a beginning, but it felt right. Hank turned from the sunrise, stepping back inside. "You're going to wear that pencil down to a nub," he said, his voice warm with a tease. "What's that? Blueprint number 3? Sophia looked up, her gray sweater dusted with sawdust, and grinned. 4, actually. I'm thinking we add a corner for the kids. Teach them how to fix bikes, maybe cars. You'd be good at that." He chuckled, leaning against the bench. "Me, a teacher? You've got more faith in me than I do. But yeah, could work. Keep 'em busy, off the streets." "Exactly," she said, tapping the pencil on the pad. "And it's not just them, it's us. This place could be more, Hank. A hub like the center, but yours. Ours." He studied her sketch. The garage expanded, a little awning out front, space for tables and tools. It was rough, but he saw it. The echo of his old dream, reshaped by her hands. "Ours," he repeated, testing the word. It settled in his chest, solid and real. "You're all in on this, huh?" "Dead all in," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I told you last night. I'm done running. I want roots, Hank. Here with you." He nodded, his throat tightening. Roots. He'd spent years tending everyone else's, his mom's, the town's, never thinking he'd plant his own again. But Sophia had changed that, one quiet moment at a time. He reached for the thermos, pouring them both a cup, and handed her one. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it. Start small, fix this bike, then figure the rest, together." "Together," she echoed, clinking her mug against his. They drank in silence, the coffee bitter and warm, the dawn stretching through the open door. Later that day, they drove to the community center, the bike frame rattling in the truck bed. Ruth greeted them with her usual bustle, her gray braids swinging as she admired their work. "You two are a pair," she said, clapping Hank on the shoulder. "This place wouldn't be standing without you, and I don't just mean the money." Hank glanced at Sophia, a flicker of pride in his hazel eyes. "Team effort," he said, and she smiled, her hand brushing his arm. The afternoon turned to evening, and they ended up back at the garage, the lot quiet now, the party long over. Sophia pulled a blanket from her truck, wool, a little frayed, and spread it over the gravel, gesturing for Hank to sit. "One last thing," she said, digging in her bag. She handed him a small box, plain and brown, no ribbon. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over. "Open it," she said, settling beside him. He lifted the lid, revealing a key, a simple brass thing, freshly cut, attached to a keychain shaped like a wrench. "For the garage," she explained, her voice soft. "I had it made this morning. It's yours, but I'd like to share it, if you'll let me." Hank stared at the key, his fingers tracing the wrench's curve. It wasn't just a key. It was a door, a life, a promise. He'd fixed things his whole damn life. Cars, bikes, people. But this was different. This was his to keep, to build. With her. "You're something else, Sophia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, we'll share it." She leaned into him, her shoulder against his, and they sat there under the stars, the blanket warm beneath them. The garage lights flickered above, a soft glow against the night, and Hank felt it, a peace he hadn't known he'd lost. He thought of his mom, her kitchen dances, her lessons about giving what you could. She'd like this, he reckoned. Sophia, the garage, the way it all came full circle. "You ever think about where you'd be if you hadn't stopped that day?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "By the road with my truck?" Hank tilted his head, the stars blurring above. "Nope, don't need to. I'm here, right where I'm supposed to be, He paused, then added, "What about you?" She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "Same. I don't need the world anymore, Hank. Just this. This garage, this lot. You." He didn't say anything, just pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. Words weren't his strength, never had been. But this was enough. The key rested in his pocket, a weight he welcomed, and the dawn's promise settled over them like a blessing. Days later, they'd finish Tommy's bike, bright blue with a bell Sophia insisted on, and roll it out together, the gravel crunching under their boots. The garage would grow, slow and sure, a place for kids to learn, for folks to gather, for dreams to take root. But that night it was just them, Hank and Sophia, two souls who'd found each other in the quiet, fixing more than they'd ever broken. As the stars wheeled overhead, Hank thought of his mom again, her voice in his ear. "Give what you can, son. It keeps the world spinning." He had, and it had brought him here, to a radiant dawn he'd never dared hope for, shared with a woman who'd tested his heart and found it true. The garage stood behind them, lights aglow, a testament to kindness, to love, to the miracles that bloom when you least expect them. And in that stillness, with Sophia's hand in his, Hank knew. Some things didn't need fixing. They just needed to be. And that's the end of Hank and Sophia's journey, at least for now. What did you think? I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. Are you from a small town like Hank's, Ohio? Or maybe a big city like Sophia's, Chicago? Your stories keep this channel alive, so don't be shy. If you've enjoyed this ride full of kindness, love, and a little garage magic, why not hit that subscribe button? It's the best way to stick around for more tales that warm the heart and lift the spirit. Plus, you'll never miss an update. Thanks so much for watching, folks. Your time means the world to me, and I'm grateful to have you here. Until next time, keep the doors open and the coffee warm. See you soon.